If you want to hear people's strong opinions about the old versus the new, ask them how they felt about the Super Bowl halftime show. This year, my teenage son and his friends didn't really watch much of the game, but you had better believe they all tuned in to hear Kendrick Lamar. I admitted to my teenage son about having no idea who Kendrick Lamar was prior to this, and he just rolled his eyes. "Mom, you are so old." And then I talked to my parents after the Super Bowl as well, and they wondered if that performance even qualified as music at all. We're all shocked by the next generation's preferences, their styles, their new ways of doing things. And we might not realize we're doing this, but we cast suspicion sometimes on things that are new and different. In today's reading, Matthew 9, verse 9 begins in this way. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. Now, first things first, you might be wondering, like I did, since we're reading through the book of Matthew, is this a story where the author refers to himself? And from what scholars say, that is unlikely. Due to when the book was written, it doesn't seem that that's possible. So move beyond the name Matthew for just a minute and pay attention to the fact that he was sitting at a tax booth. Not only did Jesus invite a tax collector to follow him, but verse 10 tells us he and the disciples ate a meal with tax collectors and sinners. And this is where the old versus new way of doing things would have really been shocking. The Pharisees, those religious leaders, would have actually been appalled by this. Tax collectors were seen to be greedy people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. They were pawns of the Roman authorities. So the very act of Jesus' invitation to have a tax collector join him, let alone share a meal with him, was scandalous. The old religious laws called for separating oneself from sinners in order to be made whole. So you might say they wanted a more sanitized version of religion. But instead, Jesus says to them, "I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." The way of Jesus leans into the perceived mess. And while it doesn't say, "Hey, tax collector, your corrupt ways, they're fine," it does say, "Hey, person who was previously seen as an object of hate, I see you. In fact, I'm coming to your house to eat with you." When Scripture commands us to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves, the Pharisees and the religious leaders wanted to pick and choose who fit into that category of neighbor. This section of Matthew, it continues with the final 3 of those 9 healing stories I mentioned previously. And remember, these were placed here to prove a point about Jesus' ministry being actualized. And as you read, take note of the growing tension that we see between the old and the new. In verse 9, we hear the crowds say in awe, "Never has anything like this been seen in Israel." But as we all know, it's hard to see the good in the new sometimes. And the Pharisees, they draw a very different conclusion from everything they've seen. From the tax collector to the healing, Jesus couldn't be doing this by God's authority, they conclude. In fact, it's got to be demonic, the opposite of good. And in this, Matthew is preparing us for even more opposition that's headed Jesus' way. Here are some questions for you to consider today. When have you struggled to reconcile the old with the new? And number 2, how could the church prevent itself from a sanitized version of Christianity and lean into the mess instead?